Welcome to Dwellings, a podcast from the City of San José Housing Department, where we talk with thought leaders about ending homelessness, building affordable housing, and key housing policies. I'm Jeff Scott, and I'll be your host for Season 5 of Dwellings. On today's episode, I'm joined by Kristen Clements, a division manager in the City of San José Housing Department, and Jared Ferguson, a principal planner in the city's Department of Planning, Building, and Code Enforcement. We will be doing a deeper dive into the city's housing element with a focus on the strategies included in that document and how these strategies can make a positive impact on our city. And with that, welcome Kristen and Jared. Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about your roles?
Hi, Jeff. Thanks. I am a division manager in the housing department, and I oversee our policy work and among other things. And I work really closely with our partners in citywide planning in the Planning, Building, Code Enforcement Department. And so I was one of the 3 lead staff from the housing side on creating the housing element.
And Jared, how about you? Can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, Jeff. Thanks. Jared Ferguson. I'm a principal planner in the Department of Planning, Building, and Code Enforcement. I oversee a team of 3 that is responsible for our housing policy and our housing element implementation. And I was a member of the team that put together our initial housing element.
Great. Thank you both again for joining us today. Do you mind telling our audience, what is the housing element and what is its purpose?
The housing element is part of the city's general plan. It is the plan that we do to make sure that we have enough capacity to create the housing that we need to serve our residents, and also to affirmatively further fair housing in our community to maximize housing choices, especially for residents who are in what we call protected classes. So those are folks in legally defined groups, includes race and ethnicity, seniors, people with disabilities. We think about housing options for all different parts of our city as we create the housing element. And we try to make sure that as we create the capacity, define the capacity on where we're going to create housing, preserve it, and then also make sure we protect our residents, that we're doing it in places that make sense long-term and highlight and heighten people's opportunities in the community.
Yeah, I think Kristen covered it well. Every years we have to produce this housing element document as part of our general plan and have to show where we anticipate housing growth to occur. And each cycle, as they call it, we get a allocation of housing units that we have to plan for. In this current one, we got a little over 62,000 units that we have to account for in the next 8 years. And in this most recent round, the states put on a number of new kind of more intense requirements, really reflecting, their want for more housing production and more housing units across the state in the next 8 years and into the future.
Can you guys talk a little bit about the creation of the housing element? Who is tasked with creating this housing element every 8 years? And also, what is the process that is used to create it? I understand that it's a somewhat long and arduous process to complete the housing element requirement.
There are a couple of different portions of the housing element. It really kind of divides into 2 pieces. One is an assessment of the needs in our community. And to do that work, we worked actually over a 4-year period plus in talking to different residents, talking to the general public, talking to focus groups of particular types of people like seniors or protected class members to try to assess what their housing needs are. And then there's an extensive data analysis that goes with that, that we have to do in exactly the format that the state tells us to. We also looked in the analysis portion on what parts of our community have characteristics that offer higher opportunity. And how are we trying to create the capacity for housing in those areas? So there's this big needs assessment, and the needs assessment drives the creation of a policy work plan. The policy work plan in our housing element is chapter 3, and it has 125 different strategies and programs that we are doing to foster capacity, encourage production, encourage preservation, encourage protection of residents. And all of this is based on the capacity work that planning does, and all the different steps that we need to take to get that capacity secured and follow state laws.
So on the capacity side, as I mentioned, we have to plan for and account for how we're going to accommodate all of the units that they give us through that allocation. So through the capacity, through that allocation they give us, we have to show where specifically what sites we anticipate the new housing units to occur on. So we have to go through a process and a very specific methodology to show, not only that the sites have the necessary kind of planning allowances, whether through zoning and other things, to allow for those housing units to occur if someone were to propose a development on that site, but also that it's realistic, sort of that the uses there would discontinue, that the actual housing, would happen. I think, they put a lot of emphasis on that this time, is that we really show, produce kind of evidence to show that the current uses on the site are, kind of likely to discontinue, and that, in the next 8 years, it's sort of realistic to expect that development, is likely to occur on those sites in order to account for the number of units that was done. So in developing that, we had to come up with, kind of a complex system to sort of evaluate and choose the sites in which we put the units on. We looked at, was there any recent activity on the site in terms of building permits and other things, just to sort of anticipate whether or not we think it's, would be realistic that the sites would redevelop into housing. So that was a very long process, but a good one to kind of show, what would be good sites for housing.
Does this process take into account or consideration the idea that there could be a downturn in the economy, or there could be a spike in the cost of production, and maybe things just don't get built because they don't pencil out? Is that part of the calculation that goes into this?
Yeah, no, that's a really critical question. I think, it's important to consider. Yeah. So as a part of that analysis, we kind of have to examine what are the constraints, what are the obstacles that we foresee that might occur. And, there's obviously, there's kind of government constraints, ones that are sort of within our control. And then, as I think you're alluding to, there's a lot of, non-governmental constraints. And that is sort of the most challenging part of this from I think the city's perspective, is that, particularly in the current environment, there's a lot of factors that we don't control that are really limiting our ability to grow the number of housing units in the city. From the market rate side, of units, it's very challenging from an economic perspective to produce new units. And then, on the affordable side, it's challenging, to look for those subsidy dollars to pay for affordable units. So those are some things that we highlighted in the report, and really one that we flagged in there as really the biggest hurdle is sort of those conditions that we don't control.
Yeah, so this whole barriers analysis is an important part of forming also the basis of that policy work plan, and controlling the issues as much as we can that might be somehow hindering development, and taking a look, making sure that the programs we have in place and the fees, do they facilitate housing in the next few years? This is an 8-year plan. And so again, every 8 years, we're going to take stock of what were ideas for the last plan that we put together, and did we execute on that plan, and how are we doing? And then, again, we'll go through another cycle trying to remove barriers and help production, help preservation, help tenants to stay stable. So it's an ongoing cycle. This is also, fun fact, only part of the general plan for an organization, for a jurisdiction, that the state of California has to sign off on.
And as we go through the 8-year cycle, so now we've got the housing element approved. By the way, congratulations to the staff for getting that approved.
Thank you.
So now that we're kind of in the midst of an 8-year cycle, how is the city's progress tracked throughout that time?
We're required to produce a report every year that tracks our progress on, so our performance on all those strategies that Kristen mentioned, and then also our progress on delivering those units that were within our allocation. So that is required by law every year to be submitted to the state in April. We've also built in a number of other reporting mechanisms as a part of our housing element, just sort of recognizing the importance that we're putting on housing in the city. So we've added on some additional reporting and monitoring and kind of work plan efforts related to. So we also put in as a part of this what we are calling our Housing Catalyst Team Work Plan, and it pulled a lot of the near term elements or items in our housing element and really highlighted those for our city council and for the public to say, kind of here are the big items we're currently working on right now. And so we produce a report on that as well, that goes to one of our city council committees and then also to city council. And then as a part of that work plan, we've also created a live dashboard that we're updating regularly. We have a team, like as I mentioned, called the Housing Catalyst team that meets a couple times a month and is composed of staff from different departments. And kind of their sole role is really to work on these items and work together to collaborate. And so we are updating that regularly on our city's website. On the planning side, we have a dashboard for that work plan.
Yeah, and as Jared said, I mean, there are a lot of people who participated in the formation of this plan, either just by sharing their needs or also commenting on the drafts and asking that we add certain elements, certain strategies to the document. By our count, just the public meetings up until June of 2023, when we had our city council consider and pass the housing element, we had 4,100 touches from different residents at different meetings and policy stakeholders. There's a huge variety of people who've given input. So we are trying to figure out, in a city as big as San Jose, how do you continue to communicate about the many different things going on at once without having 30 stakeholder meetings a month, because people keep asking about progress. They're trying to be efficient and continue to communication with the community as much as we could. The housing element has so many pieces of work in the policy work plan. As I said, there are about 125 in our chapter 3. What we're trying to do and what the state asks us to do is to try to pull together the work that we are doing in different places and cast it in a way that, again, fair housing is underpinning it, the removal of barriers is underpinning that work, and put it all in one place so we can help drive that work. In the past, we've had many different work plans, and as much as possible, as Jared described, we're trying to consolidate the work and to really represent all the work that staff's trying to get done so that we continue to focus on the priorities and the commitments that we've made to the community and to the state to get the work done that is in the housing element. This is not just a plan where it's like, yeah, we would like to undertake some stuff like this. This is actually a commitment to do this work. And, we expect the public to continue to hold us accountable to the milestones and the metrics we've named in the reports.
Can you give some examples, some tangible examples from the plan, if you have, maybe you have a few off the top of your head, I'm not sure, of maybe what you guys believe are kind of maybe the key strategies or the key goals that you think are most relevant to most of the people in San Jose?
Yeah, I mean, our production strategies are divided into things that could help all housing production, market rate and restricted affordable, and then some that are just for affordable. Of course, there's the commitment for us to do as much affordable housing development as possible, because we know the need is many times what the city can help fund and help see is produced by the private sector. So there's kind of, we call them bread and butter kind of work. It reflects what we do every day and our goals and objectives, and tries to, quantify how much we're going to get done, assuming a certain amount of resources. On the production side, I'll turn it to Jared. Actually, planning is doing a couple of really exciting things that we think could help speed construction and reduce costs by speeding construction so that we can really encourage that development to occur.
Yeah, Jeff, you mentioned, there's sort of things within our control, things out of our control. I think what we're focused on our big items are things, things that we do control. And on the planning side, how can we ensure that when people want to build new housing, they get those approvals as quickly as possible for the type of housing we want to see. And so one of the items that we're working on is a new streamlined approval ordinance. So this would be our own kind of version of streamlining in the city. So when I say streamlining, this would be approval of kind of multifamily housing without a hearing required. And that streamlined process allows them to get the approvals needed to kind of build new housing in a much quicker process, going from something more like typically now for a larger multifamily, probably something like 12 to 24 months, going down maybe more like to 6 months, 3 to 6 months time period. So, we think that that's a big improvement to our process. Again, something that we do control. And so we'll be working on that. We hope to have it done by the end of this calendar year to bring that forward to city council. So that's a big item that we're working on now.
I wanted to add that in offering more opportunities for residents who may be at risk of displacement, which is one of the frames and one of the underpinnings of the policy work plan. We also were really happy to bring home several years of work on what we are calling a tenant preferences program for residents who are at risk of displacement. And so this is in the policy work plan, is in the stability section number 20. And we were really happy to see council approve that policy, that program that we are now implementing on restricted affordable properties that we have money in to actually set aside 35% of the units otherwise available to the general public for residents who are living in certain areas of the city that are really seeing the most evidence of increases in rent and kind of disruption from the growth that we are trying to facilitate here. So this is an example of something that we're trying to do to use our existing resources, our affordable housing, in a way that is effective and efficient to help people as much as we can. What we did is tested with the public what they thought were important priorities for the city to achieve through housing and for housing. And I'll just say that the policy work plan involves departments across the city. Actually, for instance, we're working with all parts of the planning, building, and code enforcement department, teaming with the housing department, but we're also working with intergovernmental relations. There's items in there that Public Works and the city manager's office is involved with. But the goals for that policy work plan in chapter 3 is 1, ensuring an abundant and an affordable housing stock. 2, creating sufficient housing for people who are experiencing homelessness and making sure the services are there to help. 3 is to create housing stability and opportunities to build wealth for all types of residents. 4, to facilitate, to support healthy and thriving neighborhoods that have access to good jobs, schools, transportation, and other resources. And then 5, if we do our work right, do we have the systems in place that over the long term will create more racially and socially inclusive neighborhoods that do have different development patterns and can overcome past and present discrimination, which has really been present throughout the history of housing as to why do certain kinds of people live in certain types of units or in certain areas. The point of affirmatively furthering fair housing through this plan actually is not just to not discriminate against people, it's to overcome the effects of past wrongs in the community to make sure that what we're facilitating going forward addresses any shortfalls in neighborhoods and make sure that different kinds of people have opportunities to live in different kinds of housing across the city.
Are there consequences for cities that don't make progress, or is this more of an aspirational document?
Well, it's kind of both. It is aspirational. And as Jared said, the production numbers that we have to find capacity for, it is definitely aspirational to try to reach those regional housing needs allocation goals. really there's not enough subsidy in the state of California to get all of those affordable units done, even in San Jose at this time. But really, as we said, there's a commitment for us to abide by and perform the work that is in this housing element. And part of the reason is that the state of California, the Housing and Community Development Department, actually has enforcement capabilities for those communities. For instance, that maybe their city council doesn't vote to support something that is legally required under state law. The state Housing and Community Development Department actually has the ability to refer that problem right to the Attorney General's office. And we've seen cities get warning letters that city councils kind of taking votes that are not consistent with what they need to do under law, and actually suits filed against communities that kind of just blow off the idea that they have to do as much housing as they're allocated, for instance. The state continues to take action every year in legislation to make sure that communities not only have tools on like how do you streamline certain kind of projects, but really that's because every community needs to do their part in solving like regional housing needs. The state takes it pretty seriously if they hear of problems where communities are not doing what they should be doing. So it's more than just a public plan where people are holding us accountable. There's actually some enforcement capacity at the state too, if things go really wrong. But of course, we're never going to be in that realm because we take housing very seriously in San Jose, and we are generally very good actors and do lots of progressive things here that other communities then ask us about and try to also do. Jared gets calls from all over the state on some of the tools that they have created on the entitlement side, as an example.
So as you are putting together the housing element, are you collaborating or talking with or working with other municipalities or the county so that what we're doing kind of complements what other cities in our area are doing?
Yeah, it's a really good question, that because housing is a regional need. Some pieces of the housing element strategy section definitely have us cooperating and teaming with other jurisdictions. Really, the County of Santa Clara is an incredibly important partner for us in serving homeless needs in our community and in creating affordable housing opportunities. They have been a co-equal funder of locally created restricted affordable housing for several years now. And of course, there's new money through the state that's coming through the behavioral health system that also could be used for housing. We're pretty excited about opportunities that could create more service enhanced housing for residents who need behavioral health supports as well, as an example. I think the housing needs allocation really focuses on each jurisdiction and what they need to do. But of course, we know that VTA as a regional agency has station areas in our area, and we're collaborating with them on, kind of what falls into the San Jose bucket of the housing they want to produce at the station areas. And then also, policies that they may be co-implementing with us. Like they've talked to us about tenant preferences and all the affordable housing in San Jose on station area developments, even if we aren't a funder, as an example. So there's a regional conversation to get our work done, as there always is. But the plan technically really focuses on San Jose.
So as you're working on the housing element, and I understand this is part of or related to the general plan, but are there also any other documents that you are trying to align with, any other plans that the city may have or may be required to create that you try to do in concert with the housing element?
As I said, we've had several different plans guiding our work. As an example, every 5 years, we create what they call a consolidated plan for the use of funding that we get from the federal government for housing and community development. So we think about, in the housing element, we bring in the same priorities that we've got in our consolidated plan, which is serving homelessness needs, creating affordable housing, creating neighborhood stability and opportunities as examples, very consistent. And then think through, how can we use our community development block grant allocation, for instance, through that federal plan to accomplish some of the neighborhood serving goals that we've got in the housing element. On the homelessness side, what we've got in the homelessness section of our plan was taken really directly from the city's implementation of the countywide community plan to end homelessness, which gets created every 5 years. So we're just thinking through what is the city's job in trying to help. A lot of the homelessness work falls into the county's realm, but really what's the city need to do to tag team and to cooperate and work together to solve homelessness here. And I'll say one other thing. The city council during COVID in September 2020 passed an anti-displacement strategy for the residential sector, and that had 10 multi-part pieces of work in there on ways that we could help in all 3 P areas, as we say: production, preservation, and tenant protections. Help stabilize our residents and prevent them from having to move out of San Jose because they can't afford it here anymore, for instance. And so we brought all of the anti-displacement strategy work from that work plan into the housing element. And it's actually something that a lot of stakeholders were very focused on as we created this, to make sure that that work did not get lost, because this big thing is now, what we're reporting on. And we took that very seriously, and I did a mapping exercise to make sure we had covered everything that we were already going to do under that plan, and we brought it into this, master plan, if you will.
Yeah, I think for us in planning, there's a lot of work kind of moving forward that we have to do that's sort of outlined in the housing element, and it ties to other work and other documents we're doing. So, there's other kind of long range planning work that we want to get done around what we call our urban villages. And so those are areas where we envision, mixed use in the future happening. And so by allowing that mixed use, would create more opportunities for housing. And so, there's kind of this body of work that's embedded in the housing element that's also in our work plan. And I think also, just kind of at a more logistical level, I think we're just thinking about our work plan and capacity as staff, in the planning department. So we've committed to a lot of items, in the housing, which we think is good, but just sort of managing that workload with the resources we have, and sort of trying to best prioritize what we think will have the highest impact first. So I think that's really important of kind of our ongoing work, is just trying to think strategically about how we spend our time and our team's efforts in order to try to really deliver on what we've committed to.
So how do you go about trying to prioritize all of the tactical elements that are in this document? For example, one that jumped out to me was more proactive code enforcement, right? Because code enforcement is oftentimes complaint-based. And so this concept of proactive code enforcement kind of struck me intuitively as probably a somewhat resource-intensive thing, but it could also yield a lot of really significant benefits for residents.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, and as we were developing that, we were having those conversations. There's always sort of, I think in public service, we're always sort of, there's always a lot to do, and trying to make sure you're prioritizing the resources where you're going to have the biggest impact. And so, we've been having those conversations in our department, and also a bit with city council, in our area of work, kind of in the long range planning team. I mentioned, I have a team of 3, and 4, including myself, to focus kind of on housing element. We have a total team of 19 staff, but there's other items that they're responsible for on that team. So I think we're constantly sort of looking at the housing element and looking at other priorities, and just weighing, where we've made commitments on time in the housing element, and where we have other obligations as well, and just trying to best prioritize and balance those things out. I think where we've had clear conversations with the public and city council is that we really are treating these housing element items as mandatory as a requirement, because they were committed to in this document. So we are placing a high level of priority on getting these things done, which has already meant, beyond just my team, we're looking at other resources across the whole kind of citywide long range planning team to help us implement some of those items. But even with those resources, it still is challenging. And so I think we're going to continue to have those conversations, with the city council and with the public in terms of what we can do and what we can't do and when we can get it done, and just kind of do our best to accommodate it. But it is challenging, and I think we're constantly evaluating and updating to see how we can best accommodate and move things forward, or move things up if it needs to. Situations change, and so we just try to be dynamic.
One of the tools that we are trying to use to get at this prioritization effort was in the Housing Catalyst Workplan. We went through the near-term work items for the next couple of years and tried to rank each one in terms of its impact and its level of effort for staff. And then kind of marry that with the milestones we have to hit, so that we're just aware of what the heavy lifts are and what we need to prioritize as we plan our work every week and month. And I'll say the other thing is, it is really incumbent upon staff and the departments to make the budget requests every year through the regular budget process of the city, to make sure that we have the resources to do the work that we've got. And frankly, one of the things that the state asked every jurisdiction to do was to front load some of the most impactful work in the early years of the 8-year plan, so that it would have time to bear fruit within that cycle. And so if you look at how many things are in short term versus medium and long, I would say like 70% is in short to medium. There's very little long. And so again, there's really more good work than we could do at one time, but we're doing our very best to advance the most impactful things.
And that's kind of one of the hardest conversations I think we had. And there's a lot of hard conversations in developing the policy in element, but I think just that the conversation about resources and time, it wasn't always that we thought that suggestions were bad ideas. A lot of them we wanted to do. It was just like, how do we had to make tough decisions about like prioritizing which work comes first given the amount of resources we had. So that was always a constant hard conversation. Is people want to see it done quickly, which we agree, but it just it can be hard to sort of find those resources sometimes.
Historically, how have we being the city of San Jose, in meeting some of our kind of macro goals? For example, for housing production in each cycle, typically, are we pretty good? Are we lagging? How would you characterize it?
It's kind of a mixed bag. Just looking back on so we're in the 6th cycle now is what we plan for. Looking back at the 5th cycle, we did well at producing market rate units. So what we call our above moderate income units, we were able to produce enough of those to meet the allocation that we had. Now a lot of that came at kind of the front end of that time period, and as we sort of got to the end of that 5th cycle, production on the market rate side was really kind of coming down because of economic conditions. Where we have fallen short, and where I think we've consistently fallen short is on the lower income units, on the affordable units. Those are where we did not meet the numbers in the last 5th cycle to deliver those units, and those have historically always been the hardest for us to meet the goals of. I'm sure Kristen can add on to that too.
Well, meeting the affordable housing unit goals, again, if you take the regional housing needs allocation as an actual goal, it does have something to do with the needs in the community. That was the methodology that was employed. Like, do we have capacity? Is there space kind of near transit? Are there residents that are really doubled up and paying too much? This is an indication of need in our community, but yet the amount of resources that we've got for restricted affordable housing, which really requires subsidy to be able to offer lower rents and still, build a building that costs just as much as a market rate building would to cost to build. I think there's a calculation. There would be, we need the 40 times the amount of subsidy from the federal government in the form of tax credits and federal vouchers, by the way, but tax credits and tax exempt allocations for us to be able to issue bond financing. Just so many times more than the supply that we've got, just to meet San Jose's goal. We have local sources of funding, and we can support only as many deals and as many affordable units as we've got local funding for. The state also has some funding available, but they're in a budget deficit situation. But really, without those tax credits, the entire deal financing cannot come together. So again, in our last notice of funding availability round that we were able to put out late last year, I think we were able to anticipate we had enough money to fund 4 deals that applied, and there were 14 more behind it that we didn't have enough money to subsidize. Nor would all 18, I guess, be able to at the same time get tax credit allocations. There's just not enough to go around. So that's why the affordable numbers always come in short. It's because it requires subsidy. And without all the pieces of subsidy needed for every deal, the deal just can't come together. So there are reasons, despite our best efforts, why those numbers go short, but we're still trying.
Well, thank you both. This has been a very enlightening conversation. I appreciate it. We could go on for hours and hours, I'm sure, on this topic. There's so many elements to it, so many aspects to it. But before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to say? Anything glaring that I should have asked you that I hadn't asked you that you'd like to share with our audience?
Big picture, we spent a lot of time trying to put this plan together. It is really aspirational. And, thank you to the hundreds and thousands of people who gave feedback and helped us do this work. We want to make good on this plan as much as we can and really facilitate what we said in our goals, an abundant housing stock, and then do it in a way that makes sure we've got opportunities out there for all kinds of people to access housing. So the way we do the work is really important, and the ability to get housing to go forward in places that maybe it hasn't gone forward before is really critical to us meeting the needs for our community for tomorrow. And that's what this is about. This is long-range planning, forward-looking work. So I think it's important, and I understand why the state is trying to make sure that communities kind of do what they can and do everything they can to make housing go forward. Because, if you don't have housing, where are you? It's impossible to be stable and productive without it. So for all of these items that we are working on, every time something goes to Housing and Community Development Commission or to the Planning Commission or to the City Council, there's always opportunities for people to, go and comment on how we're doing the work. And then obviously to follow our progress with annual reports, and then the Power BI dashboard on the planning website as we are making progress slowly but surely through all of this work.
Yeah, I would just add on, I think, the work is evolving too. And so, it's not, we've committed to all these things and we're going to work on them, but we're constantly thinking and rethinking and changing as well to try to adapt and to try to meet the goals, right? So there's going to continue to be opportunities for the community to engage and for us to think and work on. So just, it's an ever evolving process, and there's more opportunity to come over the course of the 8 years.
Kristen, Jared, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with our audience. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, our pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
Thanks so much, Kristen and Jared, for joining me on today's episode. Thanks for listening to Dwellings, the City of San Jose Housing Department podcast. Our theme music is Speed City, composed and performed by Attain Charles. Thanks to San Jose Jazz for letting us use their music. If you like the show, please subscribe and share with your friends and family. If you're looking for more ways to help address housing and homelessness issues in San Jose, please check out the show notes. You can follow the Housing Department on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at SJ City Housing. And if you have questions or comments about today's episode, please send them to housingcoms@sanjoseca.gov. The artwork on our website was created by Chelsea Palacio. Dwellings is produced by me, Jeff Scott, and Jose Chavez of the Housing Department.